Are you ready? Don't go anywhere. Mr. Hush is about to take you on a spine-chilling journey with his captivating horror stories. Story 1.
I'm 53 years old and married to my husband, who is in his mid-60s. We've been saving for years with the dream of moving to the picturesque island of Santorini, where we hope to find a cozy home, perhaps a villa or a seaside cottage. To make this happen, we plan to visit Santorini for several weekends in 2017. Our goal was to enjoy short breaks of about 2 or 3 days by the beach, relaxing, tasting local cuisine, and in the mornings, scouting for a house with the help of local real estate agents. Our first visit to Santorini didn't go as we had hoped. We struggled to find a house that appealed to us or fit within our budget. The properties that interested us were beyond what we could afford. We were trying to find something reasonably priced without exhausting our savings too much, especially since we still had a mortgage back in the UK. Our budget was between $150,000 and $180,000, which was a reasonable range considering the market. During our second trip a month later, we found some better options. First, we checked out a sizable villa, but it was simply too large for the two of us. My husband had recently had a hernia operation and was relying on a cane, so a smaller place made more sense for us. Although the villa met our financial criteria, we did not need all that extra space. The second property we looked at was a semi-detached house with 2 bedrooms. The building was made from a material that looked like marble, which gave it a polished and somewhat upscale appearance despite its actual price. It didn't have a garden, but it did include a garage, which was a nice perk. We weren't particularly interested in maintaining a garden. Our main motivations for relocating to Santorini were the fantastic climate, community atmosphere, rich culture, and, naturally, the beach. The weather in Santorini is simply extraordinary. If you haven't been there, I cannot recommend it enough. The sunshine, the sea, and the overall climate make it feel like paradise. When we stumbled upon the second property, everything went seamlessly. The real estate agent led us through the home, showing us each room. It was compact and inviting, considerably smaller than the villa we had first considered. We had no desire for extravagant features like swimming pools, elaborate entertainment rooms, or indoor gyms. After all, we were approaching retirement. My husband was nearing retirement age, while I still had nearly a decade to go. Our plan was to visit Santorini once a year for vacations and eventually, once we both retired, sell our house in the UK to settle in Santorini permanently. From the moment we stepped into the property, we felt an immediate sense of belonging. It was located just off the main street, surrounded by shops and a vibrant local market. The produce was outstanding. Have you ever tasted a watermelon from Santorini, or the bananas, apples, pears, and berries? It was truly delightful. So, we decided to buy the property. It was originally listed at around $171,000, but after some negotiation, we secured it for $159,000, which felt like a small miracle. The housing market was relatively quiet at the time, which worked in our favor. We moved in for our first holiday in 2018, planning a 2-week stay as that was the maximum time I could take off from work at the time. The house came with some dated furniture, chairs, sofas, tables, and kitchen appliances. We needed only to buy bedding and a few essentials like groceries. We stocked up on coffee, tea, milk, sugar, and flour, along with various items for cooking and baking. Occasionally, we would dine in, but we also enjoyed eating out at local restaurants, even if they were a bit pricey. Everything went smoothly until our second visit. The first trip had been pleasant, but we hadn't paid much attention to our neighbors since we hadn't met them yet. We didn't have many friends in Santorini, aside from the restaurant owners we frequented. However, during our second trip, I noticed that the neighboring terrace house now had occupants. I didn't recall anyone being there during our first visit, or perhaps they were just quieter then. This time, however, it felt as if a chaotic indoor soccer game was taking place next door, lots of shouting and bouncing noises. A large family of 8 was living in the small 2-bedroom terraced house next to ours. "Oh no," my husband Dave remarked, turning to me as we were about to unlock our door. "These must be our new neighbors." We had no idea if they owned the property or if they were just renting it. We hadn't spoken to them yet, but we knew we would need to at some point if we were to live next to them permanently in the future. The first night and the entirety of our second stay were nightmarish. The noise levels were excruciating, with banging on the walls, yelling, and shouting. It seemed to be a large family, but I couldn't tell their nationality. They could have been Turkish or from another region. I couldn't really discern. I was left contemplating what to do next. We definitely didn't want to involve the police and jeopardize our relationship with our new neighbors, but we couldn't continue to live like this. Our first day there had turned into a disaster, leaving us utterly exhausted from the racket next door. Initially, my husband considered confronting them, but how would we go about it? Socializing wasn't our strong suit, and this family seemed entirely different from us, speaking a language we didn't understand and following customs unfamiliar to us. By the second day, the situation became unbearable. The evening arrived, and the noise from their house showed no signs of letting up. So, mustering all our courage, Dave and I made our way over to their door. When we knocked, silence suddenly fell upon their house. It was both a relief and disconcerting. Why had the commotion ceased so abruptly? It was as if they were startled by our knock. After a brief moment, we could hear the sound of them unbolting the door. These old-style terrace houses sported large wooden doors with stone handles. You could sense someone coming to the door. They didn't ignore our knock but appeared anxious. The door opened to reveal a very petite lady, around 4 feet 10 inches tall, clad in a long dress. I sensed she was the matriarch of the family, as I had yet to see a man, always just her and the children, ranging from about 4 to 11 years old. The noise from the kids had gone completely quiet, as if they were holding their breath waiting for their mother to greet us. We stood there, locking gazes with her, trying to build the courage to voice our concerns. I struggled to speak, and strangely enough, my husband, who had originally suggested we talk to her, fell silent as well. The lady merely stared back at us. She didn't answer immediately, and it felt as though she was peering into our souls. After a lengthy pause, she finally said, "Okay," but before we could offer any further comment, she slammed the door shut and bolted it behind her. I turned to Dave and wondered, well, now what? He simply replied, "Okay," with a hint of amusement at her abruptness. I chuckled lightly, but in truth, I remained unsettled by our new neighbor. I couldn't help but wonder why she and her family were there. Were they renting, vacationing, or planning to live there permanently? We returned to our home, and that night, we finally slept well. The previous night had been sleepless due to the noise, but since speaking with them, the house next door had fallen quiet. If anything, we were now the noisy ones. During that second visit, we didn't hear a peep from our neighbors, but when we came back for our third trip, we were met with a shocking sight. We arrived at the airport early, but still felt weary from waking up at around 2:00 a.m. in the UK for our flight. Upon returning to our village, we took a leisurely stroll along the main street before heading to our house. It felt like a second home, and we knew the area well. After a few hours out, we returned to our place that evening. That's when I noticed that our front door had been forcibly opened and every room inside was a disaster, with paint splattered everywhere. The furniture lay in ruins, broken and in disarray. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Some might ask, could the neighbors have done this? As it turned out, they were just renters, not the owners. To this day, no one else has lived there, which has provided us some peace of mind. However, we had to spend $5,000 to repair the damage, fix the door, clean up, and remove the paint from the walls. I can't fathom why someone would do this, especially if they didn't know us. It's hard to believe that a single complaint would lead a family to such extremes. Perhaps it's just a sad truth about the world we live in, but it's not something we can't recover from. The lesson learned here is to always take the time to understand your neighbors before purchasing a home. The house itself is just one part of what defines your living experience.
Story 2.
I lived in a charming house in Florida, near a town called Port Charlotte. My wife, Claire, worked in finance, while I was an IT consultant. Sometimes I worked from home, but I also traveled to assist companies with various projects. Occasionally, I flew to Europe to help with cybersecurity. Overall, we had a fulfilling life, steady jobs, a lovely home, yet we had no idea that everything was about to change drastically. In hindsight, I should have noticed that Claire was behaving differently. She seemed distant and a bit irritable. She used to run several times a week, but that had dwindled to only once or twice a week. One Saturday morning, as we sat down for breakfast, she told me she needed to talk. Her expression was grave, as though she feared my reaction to what she was about to say. I expected her to broach the subject of our relationship, concerned that it was falling apart, but I was way off the mark. She took a deep breath and said, 2 months ago, I found a lump in my right breast. By the end of the week, her doctor called her in for further tests, and they confirmed she had breast cancer. As the weeks passed, more tests revealed that the cancer spread to her lymph nodes. The doctors informed us it was quite serious and estimated she might only have a year, maybe a year and a half, at best. We sat in silence, both in shock and deeply saddened. Claire's health declined rapidly. I took care of her at home, with support from a few compassionate nurses who provided care. But one day, she didn't wake up, and it became painfully obvious that she had passed away in her sleep. I organized her funeral and took care of all the necessary arrangements. In time, I managed to grieve, and about 6 months later, I decided to sell our house and move to North Carolina. I felt the need for a fresh start and believed Claire wouldn't want me to remain enveloped in sadness forever. After searching for a while, I found a 3-bedroom house with 2 bathrooms and a sizable yard just outside Port Charlotte. I began the arduous task of packing our belongings, including Claire's cherished items that I couldn't bear to part with. Though months had passed, I couldn't bring myself to throw away or donate any of her belongings, no matter how much I tried. I promised myself that once I settled into the new house, I would sort through Claire's clothes and personal items to find suitable homes for some of them. The move to the new house went smoothly. Everything was handled efficiently, and surprisingly, nothing was damaged along the way. However, the house and garage quickly filled with boxes. During the first week, I struggled to find appropriate places for everything, particularly the furniture from our old home. Some items were old and worn, so I left them packed, planning to replace them later, which resulted in clutter around the house. One significant oversight I had on moving day was forgetting to pick up curtains and blinds for the windows. Fortunately, the previous owner had left theirs behind, which was a relief. The first week in the new house went well. I had taken 2 weeks off from work for the transition. But during the second week, odd occurrences began to happen. It was a Monday morning, and I had just finished a bowl of cereal. As I stood up and walked towards the door, I noticed a package had arrived. I signed for it and then closed the door. When I returned to the kitchen, I was taken aback to see that all the drawers were pulled halfway out. My mind raced, wondering, what's going on? I checked the back door to ensure no one had entered and surveyed the rest of the house, but there was no sign of anyone inside. After retrieving the package, I pushed the drawers back into their places and settled back at the breakfast table. Everything seemed quiet and normal. After finishing my coffee and tidying up, I decided to head into town to pick up some supplies from the grocery store and explore a bit. I returned home about 3 hours later and unloaded my purchases. After a quick lunch, I thought about jumping into the pool for a swim, which would be my first dip since moving in. I went upstairs to grab my swim trunks and a towel. However, when I reached my bedroom, I encountered a problem with the door. It felt stuck. This was the first time I'd experienced this issue since moving in. I pushed against the door and turned the handle, and suddenly, it swung open, causing me to stumble into the bedroom. I opened and closed the door several times, and this time it functioned perfectly. After changing, I grabbed my towel and bathrobe, making my way downstairs to the backyard. As I walked across the grass toward the pool, I noticed there was water pooled along the walkway near the shallow end, suggesting someone had used the pool recently. I scanned the area, hoping to catch sight of another person, but saw no one. I hung my robe and towel on a pool chair, then stepped into the water using the ladder. I began swimming and relaxing, but my mind kept drifting back to the strange drawer incident and the mystery of who might have been in my pool. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't let go of my unease. While I swam toward the deeper end, an unsettling sensation overcame me, as if someone else might be in the pool with me. I glanced back, catching sight of ripples near the shallow end, similar to what you'd see when someone is moving through water, but again, no one was there, and the ripples gradually faded away. Following the sensation, I continued to swim back and forth. When I finally emerged from the pool to grab my towel, I found it had been moved to a different chair. Shocked, I noticed it was wet and appeared to have been used. I sat on a pool chair, looking around, but still, no one was within sight. I glanced back at the pool, and to my astonishment, I caught sight of a small figure lingering in the deep end. It resembled a child floating motionless. Without hesitation, I dove back into the pool and swam to the deep end. As I reached where the figure was, it began to blur. I could make out a boy's face, perhaps around 10 years old, but just as quickly, the image faded. I surfaced, coughing water, searching frantically all around and under the water, but there was no one there. Feeling bewildered, I climbed out of the pool and sat back down, grappling with confusion. I thought to myself, maybe the grief over Claire's passing was causing me to see things that weren't there. I closed my eyes, attempting to calm my racing thoughts. Suddenly, I heard a voice. I jumped to my feet, opened my eyes, and scanned my surroundings for the source. Then I saw a small shed at the end of the garden, with a pile of firewood stacked nearby. I wrapped my bathrobe around me and walked toward the shed, drawn by the voice. Upon arriving, I scanned the area, then opened the shed door to find it filled with gardening tools and a broken lawnmower. Moving around to the back of the shed, I initially saw nothing unusual, but then I noticed a patch of new grass among the tall weeds and bushes. It struck me as odd that someone would plant new grass amidst all that overgrowth. It looked artificial and out of place, as if it was trying to conceal something. I went back into the shed and found a spade. I stood over the patch of new grass, hesitating for a moment, wondering, what am I doing? Is this really wise? Still, I began to remove the top layer of grass, uncovering soft, easily dug soil beneath. Digging deeper, the spade hit something solid. I cleared away the dirt and discovered a decaying roll of carpet. It had cables wrapped around it, resembling wiring from a television. I cautiously lifted the carpet roll, but it crumbled in my hands. As I set it down, one of the cables snapped, and a decayed arm tumbled out. Terror gripped me, and I stumbled back. I bent down to remove the other cable, causing the carpet roll to fall apart and reveal a rotten shoe and 2 leg bones. In a panic, I rushed back to the house and quickly dialed 911. The sheriff's car arrived within 10 minutes, accompanied by a crime scene investigation team. After their examination, they concluded that the remains belonged to a young boy, likely about 10 years old. They found traces of chlorine on the clothing covering the badly decomposed body. The police theorized that the child had either accidentally drowned in the pool or had been pushed into it. They questioned why I had chosen to dig there on that particular day. I concocted a story, not wanting them to think I'd been hearing strange voices. They interviewed the previous owner and his family, but since that day, nothing unusual has occurred in the house. Still, I can't shake the feeling of discomfort and unease living here after that day.
Story 3.
My grandparents owned a sprawling farm with horses, and I spent countless hours caring for them whenever school was out. When I turned 21, I met my husband, Jake. A few years later, we married and welcomed 2 children into our lives. My oldest daughter was 8 years old when I received an unexpected phone call from a man named Mr. Thompson, who identified himself as an attorney handling my grandparents' estate. He informed me that my grandfather had passed away and, to my surprise, that I had inherited their home. I was 32 at the time and had never met or even spoken to my maternal grandparents. They had never reached out to me throughout my life. Mr. Thompson also mentioned that my grandmother had passed away a few years earlier. I tried to feel sorrowful, but I couldn't even picture their faces. I think the lawyer sensed my confusion, so he got straight to the point. You've inherited their home. I didn't know how to respond. Mr. Thompson explained that my mother was meant to receive the house, but since she too had passed away, I was her only living heir. I inquired about other relatives, and he told me that my mother had a brother who had also died. I called Jake right away to share the news. When he returned home, we discussed it in depth. He suggested I contact my other grandparents to get their perspective before proceeding with any legal decisions. I did so, and they expressed little interest in the house. To clarify, these were my paternal grandparents, not the ones who had passed. They said they had no strong feelings about it. They didn't know my mother's parents well enough to have an opinion. When I spoke to Mr. Thompson again, he offered to meet me in person, which I appreciated since I was looking for more clarity. We arranged to meet at a CAF in town. Mr. Thompson appeared trustworthy. He was an older gentleman in his 50s, well-dressed, and communicated clearly. He provided the necessary paperwork, which seemed authentic. After further discussion with Jake, we decided to visit the house together, leaving our kids with his parents and other relatives. We planned to depart on Saturday and return the following day, ensuring one of us would be around for the kids' school drop-off. The flight took about 6 hours, and we arrived at the property late at night. Mr. Thompson greeted us, but he seemed in a hurry to get home, handing over the keys in the driveway and encouraging us to explore our new property. The estate was expansive, and the main house was obscured from view due to the dense shrubbery and towering oak trees. The air felt crisp and clean, and the neighborhood was serene and tranquil. Even though it was getting dark, I could already sense that I would like it here. Initially, our plan was to tour the house, spend the night in a local hotel, and then head back in the morning. But with the keys in hand, we opted to stay in the house instead. The home was spacious and sturdy, constructed from wood and stone. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. After locating the light switch, the warm yellow glow filled the rooms, making it feel cozy and inviting. Jake and I had discussed selling the house, but standing here now, I hesitated to let go so easily. We set down our bags and began exploring the house. It boasted 4 bedrooms, but it was evident that my grandparents had occupied it alone in their later years. I focused my attention on the upper floor while Jake remained downstairs. I could hear him opening doors and drawers, meticulously inspecting every corner he could find. He called out to share his findings in the basement, mentioning how much stuff was down there, and that he wanted to investigate further. About 30 minutes later, a loud sound reverberated from the basement and then abruptly stopped. Moments later, I heard Jake call my full name, which he rarely did. Instinctively, I knew something was wrong. When I rushed into the basement, Jake's face was ashen with fear. He stammered, "I think I found a body." Stunned, I followed him into the massive basement, nearly half the size of the entire house. He pointed toward a significant crack in the concrete floor behind a wooden crate. Initially, he thought it was a structural issue, but it turned out to be a poorly covered-up excavation site. Using a crowbar, he pried up a piece of concrete, releasing a putrid odor and revealing part of a decayed skull partially embedded in the ground. I gasped in horror as Jake held me tightly, trying to help me catch my breath. He led me upstairs, where we waited for the police to arrive along with a crime scene investigation team. After completing their examination, they determined that the body was likely my grandmother's, who had gone missing before being officially declared dead. The most plausible explanation was that my grandfather had killed her and buried her in the basement. I was immensely relieved to leave that place behind, grateful never to return and eager to put the traumatic episode to rest. The house was sold shortly after the investigation wrapped up, but the horrifying experience left me shaken and disturbed.